Welcome to Malts and Music, a brand new podcast brought to you by the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. My name is Vic Galloway. I'm a broadcaster, author, musician and lifelong music fan. I'm also a massive whisky fan. This podcast is inspired by my own experience of pairing up 12 single cask malt whisky flavour profiles with 12 music genres. I thought, let's do something similar. Get some creative people to pair up 5 tracks with 5 delicious whiskies. We also talk about their lives, their careers, their experiences, and go off on various tangents. Enjoy. Slange. Welcome to Malts and Music, Nicola Meighan.
Thank you very, very much.
Esteemed broadcaster, journalist, DJ, music fan, brilliant person, friend of mine, and I'm delighted that you're here to drink some drams and talk about some tunes.
You know, it's such a pleasure. I have got an elderly uncle, Uncle John, who grew up in Draploch in Stirling, but became quite a well-known architect, and he now lives in Australia. He's now in his 80s. Mm-hmm. But he comes back fairly regularly, and he stays at my mum's in Riverside in Stirling, but he makes a pilgrimage to this place every year. So I've heard about it, spoken about in hushed tones for a very long time. This is the first time I've been inside it. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, we're in the cask room today. A slightly different room from some of the other podcasts we've done, but it's a look at all the accoutrements.
Yeah, I know. It's all the detail, isn't it?
Isn't it?
It feels
isn't it? It's
proper.
Great. No, it's lovely to be here. I tell you what, let's just crack into our first dram. We've got 5 to get through. When I say get through, as if it's a chore.
It's a slog.
So we've got our taster packs here, which I always love digging into. Aren't they cute?
It's just such a lovely idea. So you very kindly asked me to be a part of this, and I jumped at the chance. And then this arrived in the post, not this one, because my version of that is empty and was very much
You've
enjoyed.
already gone through them, yeah.
But I think what's so lovely is even just the packaging, the detail, it's like properly like, what's inside here?
Yeah.
Every part of it's lovely.
And I'm sure people watching know about the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, but there are flavour profiles which have different colours for each one. So you've got young and sprightly, sweet, fruity and mellow, sweet and spicy, spicy and dry, deep, rich and dried fruits, old and dignified, and so on. And so with every dram that we've got a different set of tasting notes and some information. So we're going to go straight in with a Speyside, and it is called Pour It Around Midnight. It is a sweet and spicy flavour profile, and here's a little bit of the tasting note blurb. A rich fusion of marmalade and ripe dark fruits merged with nutmeg and demerara sugar in a juicy fruitcake, while fragrant aromas of carnations and lychee washed over burnt toffee and pipe tobacco.
It's like you're quoting poetry at me, Vic Galloway.
Well, I think it's going to be poetry on our tongues. Well, I'm hoping it will be anyway. Let's go. And
I just love, it's like this little envelope which has all the notes inside it, and it's just so beautifully put together. But I love how much care has been taken with the descriptions, but they're never inaccessible. Every one of them you can imagine. Whether you smell it or taste it or not is another matter. That's when the fun really begins.
Yes. Well, let's have a look. So this is a Speyside. It's a first fill ex Cosecha wine barrique. It's aged 7 years, so not the oldest. It's 59.8%, and a Speyside, as I say.
Youthful, huh?
Yes,
just
quite
like
youthful. Although I think like wines and so on. I think people always expect the older the better, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. Maybe predominantly the case, but not always. So pour it around midnight. Slange, yeah.
Slange indeed. Dive in.
Okay, the flavour profile, spicy and sweet. Definitely a bit of spice, straight away.
You can feel it.
Yeah.
You can feel it like at the back of your throat. You can feel it in your nose. But I love that. It almost goes up to your eyes.
Yeah.
That's what you want. Like, you know where you are now. Okay?
It's sweeter on the nose, and yet it's definitely spicy on the tongue and at the back of the throat, as you say.
It's got that properly warming. Like, you can physically feel it. And I think that's what's so lovely about this. And I do also, enjoy putting a little bit of water in my whiskey as well.
There's water.
But I like the contrast, so I always like to try it like that, and you really get the hit.
Yeah.
But it stays with you. It's that idea of not rushing something. I'm bad for just drinking pints, you know this more than anybody, and I'll just like absolutely get hammered into them. Just it's just like constant volume.
Yeah.
This is the opposite of that.
Absolutely, and I think all the better for it. I mean, I also think there's obviously nothing wrong. It's famous mixing whiskey and beers, you know, having a half and a half.
Yeah.
But I think if you stay purely on whiskey and water, obviously, not overdoing it, but drinking your drams and having enough water without going near beer or wine or anything that you mix it with, you feel a different kind of sensation as the evening progresses.
Yeah.
Not just in your taste buds and your kind of sinuses and all that sort of stuff, but as you get, dare I say, ever so slightly inebriated.
It's a different effect, absolutely. And I think part of that is just the circumstance as well. I think that whatever you drink and who you drink it with has a huge impact on the way you then feel about it. And I think there is something, and it can be very different, it's never the same, but I think there is something really ritualistic about sitting down and having a dram and maybe choosing your whiskey or being surprised by someone and do you have ice in it, or the little jug and the little bit of water, or the dropper of water.
Yeah.
You know,
it's
absolutely. Like every detail is really important, and it's a lovely thing.
I'm learning about it as well as I go further into the flavour profiles and doing, you know, working alongside the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. Yeah. I'm learning about my own palate as much as anything else, and finding out which of the flavour profiles I tend to go for.
Really?
And
okay.
also, you know, what dram you'll have in the summer versus what dram you might have in the winter, and obviously spring and autumn in between. But I kind of, you know, it's definitely, I'm working out my way through the whiskey world.
Yeah.
You're a whiskey fan. How did you first come across it? Was it your Uncle John?
Probably not. No, I think I came across it at, you know, I became aware of its existence, if you like, probably as a kid, and it was something that I associated with, you know, family drinking at New Year. Yeah. A bottle of whatever was there, I guess grouse probably, or if they were being fancy, stick it in a decanter, which is, you know, a brandy in one and the whiskey in the other. And so I knew of the smell of it. You know, I could distinguish the smell of whiskey for a long time before I ever tasted it.
Some people loved it, that smell, or the smell of it, but also maybe the smell of it on someone else. And some people, I don't like it. And some people like, oh no, I used to, my granddad would have a dram and I could smell it off.
Exactly.
You know.
I think that's purely an association, you know, if you've got a nice memory of those family parties and you know, because when I think about back to my granddad, so he, so this would be my Uncle John's dad, my mum's dad, and he was a builder in Stirling, so he built loads of the local, now sadly demolished landmarks of my youth, you know, the swimming pool and the ice rink.
Wow.
Yeah. So I kind of hung about a lot of those building sites as a kid, but that meant he worked very early in the morning and he worked long hours, so he didn't really drink unless it was the New Year. Right. And so I would have a very particular association of even smelling whiskey, and it would do with, you know, them, my nana and my pop kicking back a bit and having a few people round, and so it was almost, I suppose, exotic in a funny way, although it was utterly Scottish, you know, it was embedded in a certain time of year. And then by the time I became a teenager, and you just kind of go through that phase of drinking anything you can get your hands on. Yeah. If it was ever whiskey, the thing then was that it was about disguising the alcohol, wasn't it? So it was about finding the best mixer to hide the flavour, which is total sacrilege now. But it served its purpose.
I also think a lot of people still do that well into adulthood. They don't want to taste the whiskey or the vodka or the gin. But I think as people start finding out about the Epicurean side of it, the actual taste and the you know, the difference, the diversity within it. You start going, actually, you know what, hold the Coke, I'm just gonna taste the good stuff.
I mean, I've just put a little bit of water in there now, and again, I'm not in any way, I'm not an expert, I'm not a purist, I'm very much led by the company. Yes. So you know, I don't really know what the correct volume is, I just put some in there. Yeah. For me, that's absolutely perfect now. So it's still got all the richness, but it's opened it up somehow.
Yeah, I don't think there are any rules really. It's just like what does it for you. I don't like the snobbery around whiskey or wine or anything for that matter. It's like it's for everyone. Yeah, exactly. And it's up to you how you deal with it. However, there are experts who know exactly what they're talking about. And I bought some wine recently, and I like wine. I know a very small bit about it. But I asked the person in the kind of wine shop to give me a tour and tell me what, you know, I gave them roughly what I was interested in, and they told me, oh, I think you'll like this, or this is really nice, or this is really good value, or whatever, you know, but giving you a little bit of history and so on. And that's nice when there's an expert, but doesn't matter how much water you put in. Or...
No, exactly. I think that's it. The accessibility of it's lovely. I've got a cousin, Duncan, who is lives in Alloa and has the most incredible, extensive whiskey collection I've ever seen. So they live in this house, and he's actually had a special shelf built about 3/4 of the way up the wall for all of his whiskey bottles. And
wow.
I can't even tell you the value, monetary, emotional, sentimental, ancient value of some of these bottles. They mean everything in many ways. But there is nothing that you can't have. Do you want something? My husband,
do you want
John,
an Isla? Do you want a... Yeah,
so
right,
sometimes John, or my uncle John, if he's over, and they'll be like, oh, look at that. Oh, I couldn't have that, though. No, everything's there for enjoying in whatever way you want. It's just that thing of someone being super passionate about something and wanting to share that, and that's totally the same in music as well. It's not that thing. It's not a secret. It's not a secret that's just to be kept. And who's going to be impressed by that anyway? Yeah. It's like, look, do you enjoy it? Brilliant. What do you like about it? Do you want some more? Yeah. I've tried this one.
Well, you and I have got to know each other over the years and bonded specifically about music. And this is Malts and Music, so we're going to go for your first choice to accompany Pour It Around Midnight. Yeah. Nina Simone, My Baby Just Cares For Me. Absolute stone cold classic. Tell me why you went for that.
Yeah. Do you know, it's funny, I tend to, with certain things, not massively question my initial instincts or reactions to things. I kind of maybe trust them for better or worse. And so with this, it came to me quite quickly, and then afterwards I thought, there's probably a few reasons why that fits beautifully, but really I think this is the first one where I sat down and tried. It was quite late, it was Friday night. It wasn't that long ago, but it was cold enough that I had the fire on. Yeah. And it just made me think a bit of jazz music. There's something about savouring it. There's something about losing yourself in something. And there's some lovely, lovely parts of the description in here, which I just think are wonderful. There's a bit where it says, fragrant aromas of carnations and lychee. It's this bit. Washed over burnt toffee and pipe tobacco. And I suddenly had a vision of, Nina Simone in some cabaret club in the mists of smoke. And I know obviously she's phenomenal in terms of her civil rights activism and, in the songs that she's written, Mississippi Goddamn, and hugely, hugely powerful songs. But what a torch singer she is. Yeah. And that voice and that particular song, My Baby Just Cares For Me, because to me, it does two things. It takes me back to 1957, I think she first recorded it. So I can lose myself in a romantic notion of what that must be like. And again, this is the whiskey, if you like, taking me through all this and opening up my imagination. But that song was reissued in 1987, okay? So it's also a total song of my childhood. And even that, it ushers you in, you've got the kind of brush drums, the piano at the start of it. That's literally, I think that's like a glass of whiskey going, come on in. It's a warm embrace.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, with a maybe a slightly sharper, more pungent, peatier whiskey, you might have chosen perhaps one of the angrier songs. I think that song goes absolutely perfectly with this.
And the thing is, her character as well is just utterly phenomenal, so she is known for this utterly beautiful voice and something like Feeling Good, utterly rousing, but my goodness, as a character, she sounds like she was astounding. Have you read Warren Ellis from Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, his new book about Nina Simone's gum?
I haven't, but I've seen it, and I've seen many people talk about it as well, but I haven't actually had a chance to read it yet.
It's staggering. So I
read it. It's kind of encapsulates the idea of utter fandom and sort of how something small can change the world in a way.
I think it is. I mean, it's almost Warren Ellis's own magical thinking, if you like, and magical view on the world. And on a very practical level, it's literally about a piece of chewing gum which he retrieved from a grand piano, or a towel on a grand piano, at Nina Simone's last ever concert in London. He just saw it there. It'd been part of Nick Cave's meltdown, and he crawled up on the stage and he got it in the towel, and he just kept it and didn't really question it. But in the book it speaks about throughout Warren Ellis's life the way in which he has collected artefacts, and they have come to take on hugely powerful resonances to him. And so it encapsulates that. But also it totally speaks to the fact that we all have those obsessions. Certainly for you and I, it's with music. So on a slightly comparative level, I still own a lime, like the fruit, which is now completely fossilised, which was given to me by Herbie Flowers, who played the double bass on Walk on the Wild Side, right? Yes, phenomenal bass player, in the back alley of the Usher Hall in 1991.
Oh, wow.
I kept it all this time. It's in my loft.
I've got a few sort of scribbled autographs on tickets and things like that, but I have to admit, I probably do have some odds and sods buried away in boxes. And
it's like it contains some magical essence, and I don't know if that essence is really to do with that person, or if it's to do with a projection of like what they mean to you, or, you know, the fact that you want to somehow hold the power that they have or their music has. I can't really utterly explain why I kept a line from Herbie Flowers, why I lot it. I mean, it didn't go mouldy. This is an interesting thing I can tell you about the lifespan of a line.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
It's literally almost like a little fossil now.
Yeah,
it's weird. So the book partly justified that, but it also celebrated Nina Simone, spoke about her character, spoke about her brilliance, spoke about her chewing gum. But it's also about art and creativity, and so Warren Ellis also talks about, you know, the germ of an idea and how it can be flattened or it can change the world.
Yes.
And in a way, his retrieval of this piece of chewing gum just opened up this whole world. It's been part of an exhibition. It's gained in purpose and momentum. But also to me, it's about something which is bigger than the sum of its parts. Mm-hmm. And I do think there's an element of, you know, sitting down and spending time with someone and maybe having a dram and telling stories, because it's always about stories, isn't it? Whiskies is about stories. And so I think that really struck me as well, you know, sitting with Nina Simone in my mind, drinking this and thinking, yeah, you know, you can delve into a song or a glass or a story, or you can keep someone's piece of chewing gum forever. And it can mean the world.
It can be, it's the smallest speck of insignificance to someone else can be an entire universe.
Exactly,
to you.
Right? That's it. And that's two people sitting having a drink by the fire, or, you know, here we are, or wherever. It can be anything, and it can mean so much.
This is profound, and we're on whiskey number 1, Nicola Meighan.
Oh, God help me, I better move on, actually. Yeah, I'll just knock them straight back, and I won't be able to remember the rest of the songs.
No,
Nina Simone, though, right?
Delicious. I'm really enjoying this Pour It Around Midnight. You know, spicy and sweet Speyside. Nina Simone is playing at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
In my dreams.
With the brush drums, and that piano, and that voice.
I thoroughly enjoyed that, and it went down a little bit too quickly. I hope you'll forgive me.
You're utterly forgiven.
Don't feel like you have to follow me. Just while we're talking about, I mean, you're a massive music fan. I tend to ask the guests on this podcast about this. How do you consume music? Is it vinyl? Is it CD? Is it streaming, downloads, or a bit of all of it?
It's always been a bit of whatever I had to hand. Okay,
Yeah.
so whatever that is. So that's everything from growing up with my parents' vinyl collections and
Good
tapes.
Collections?
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I mean, they kind of schooled me well. They kind of split up when I was about 5, but they were very harmonious always in terms of like having really, really good music taste. But it was like, you know, child of the late 70s and into the 80s. So it was your Bob Dylans, your Joni Mitchells, Leonard Cohen's, and then Roxy Music, bit of Supertramp, Judy Collins, you know, so like your absolute kind of typical singer-songwriters, classic music, if you like. But then also, I've got to say, that's kind of continued. So they've always been huge music fans. So the other week I played Massive Attack's Unfinished Sympathy on the radio, and, you know, my dad's straight away texting him like, that's a great tune. He used to run this karaoke club at Arbroath Academy where he taught. And I went up one year. I was still at school at the time. I must have been about 16. And I went up and like, what's this going to be like? And my father stood there in the middle of all these, you know, all the kids from the entire school. And he sang his party piece, which was Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Relax.
What?
A passionate recounting of that particular song, I have to tell
Wow.
you.
That was not what I was expecting you to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So they both love their music, both love classical music as well. So yeah, loads and loads of different things. So yeah, tapes, whatever, when I could get CDs, if I could afford CDs, when I could finally afford a CD player, everything I saved up for. And then I moved to London and I started working in the record industry, at which point everything became accessible to me. I worked for Mute Records, and on my first day I got taken to the warehouse, and it was like, just, you know, it's literally that idea of, you know, when you were a kid and they would have those competitions, and it used to blow my mind that it could ever happen, and you were going to be given a trolley and you could go into a toy shop and you had like a minute to fill the trolley, right? And
yeah. A sort of thing that would happen on Swap Shop or something like that.
Yeah, that's what it felt like, except at Mute. That's what it felt like, except every I don't know, Depeche Mode, Diamanda Gallis, Moby, but also Sonic Youth, Dinosaur Jr., Rose McDowell had been doing stuff from Strawberry Switchblade with Boyd Rice from Non. Rhythm King was part of Mute as well, so there was all the kind of Betty Boo back catalogue, and it was absolutely wild.
That's one thing about working in the music industry, is that if you're obsessive about music, which you and I both are, you are in the right place for getting promo copies and exclusive access to things. So if people have a sort of passing interest in music, but they feel that the music industry is glamorous, think again. It's not glamorous, but there's lots of music in it. And so you can immerse yourself in music, which I've luckily been able to do for many years, as have you.
The only thing is, and I just don't know, I can't understand my own head. The whole time I lived in London, which was, I guess, 7 or 8 years, I was sort of going through some, I don't know, some sort of like non-materialistic phase. So I could have taken so much vinyl from the Mute warehouse, but because it was all there and I was a bit, I kind of didn't. I almost, I think, didn't feel it was right, because I liked the process of having to save up or, get a record. So I don't have anything like the stash I could have. I've got some absolute beauties, and I've got some lovely early demo tapes and things like that. But I still got more of a kick out of going down to the Notting Hill Tape Exchange, or the one in Camden, and getting I remember coming across a promo of Arab Straps, The Clearing, with like the Pluggers sticker on it. That was really exciting. I've still got that. And I ruined a pair of speakers with that, actually. So.
Well, let's move on to our next whiskey and our next piece of music. So what have we got here? A Fruity Prescription, which is
okay, right.
An excellent name for a whiskey.
It is indeed, and one of the things I loved about even the title of this, A Fruity Prescription, was that lovely idea of not just claiming sort of medicinal properties or whatever. It's not so much that, but it is saying, let's look at the benefits of this. Like, how can this be a sort of beneficial aspect to your day-to-day? And again, that absolutely chimes with me in music. It's like, how much can it just amplify your mood, lift your spirits, but also take you back in time, take you to a certain place. And I was thinking about A Fruity Prescription, and I was reading again these wonderfully poetic notes.
This is a spicy and sweet flavour profile as well.
Yeah.
It's a lowland whiskey. It's a first fill ex-bourbon barrel, and it's 18 years old. So what was the last one, 7 years? Yeah, so it's 11 years older than the last one. But anyway, you were about to do some of the tasting notes.
So I noticed it was 18 years old, and I started seeing descriptions like pine cones, wood saps, mossy tree bark, and I'm thinking about this point, I'm in my teenage years, I'm thinking about being 18 or thereabouts, and it took me very quickly to belly and feed the tree.
Yeah.
And I just love the idea that with a song like that, it can just stay with you and it grows and grows and grows. And in that same way, whiskey can be like a complete and utter, not just a time capsule, but it can affect time travel. Now, if we go back to that sort of time, I'd have been younger when Feed the Tree
So
came
I've
out.
got notes here. When did it first come out? 93.
Right, so there you go. So Belle, that's pretty much, that's not far off it. It was on, because when I heard it, it takes me back to, you'd have watched the chart show, right, on a Saturday afternoon, Saturday morning, the indie chart.
Yes.
Belly in there. And then I would go to Our Price and, buy whatever tape or CD I could afford. Ka-single, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's Tanya Donnelly was at the front of Belly. Of Throwing Muses and the Breeders.
Yeah, exactly.
And
like,
Belly was her project, wasn't it?
Yeah, totally.
And they've just fairly recently reformed again. I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, not that long ago. And I mean, she's still really prolific. She's actually recorded quite a few songs by Nina Simone as well. Everything's connected, right? That's the other thing.
I did not know that,
right? And that's not intentional. That's just the way things go. It's like whiskey is one thing, and it's also like millions of different things.
Well. Let me have a nose of this. I'll do some of the flavour profile notes. The initial nose was ridden with creamy vanilla custard and ripe yellow fruits. Lots of plums, mushy banana, sultanas, fresh parsley and citrus curds. Some pineapple chunks duked in fizzy sherbet. and they go on. But do you know what? This is... considering how old it is, I mean, it's a very sweet nose. I mean, all of those...
I think that's it. The sweetness in this is lovely, but it's not cloying.
No.
Right? And that's what I love about it as well. It's refreshing. That's why, it takes me back to my, my halcyon youth. You know, there's something lovely about it, and it's that sort of, is there an innocence to it in some way, you know, or an optimism to it in some way, which is really lovely. But also the kind of spicy and sweet aspect of this, and Tanya Donnelly, not necessarily directly related to, but it's very much like the whole Riot Girl thing, isn't it? It's that complete kind of clash of the two things that are maybe slightly contrasting.
You could maybe describe Tanya Donnelly as spicy and sweet herself, you know. She's definitely spicy, and I'm sure she's very sweet.
And also, who wouldn't want to be? I mean, you absolutely need an edge, right? You absolutely need the attitude to make it, to even make yourself heard, especially then. It's a hugely patriarchal. I'm thinking about their coverage in NME, Melody Maker, Sounds at the time. It's awful when you look back at how sexist a lot of it was, not all of it.
Yeah.
But also, it's the fact that in this as well, you know, things that don't necessarily, or might jar, work beautifully. This bit caught my attention because, again, it takes me back to school. Cherry throat sweets and Bonjela. You know, just like, what's in the cupboard?
Yeah.
Have you got any cough medicine?
Actually, now that you mention that, Bonjela, I'm getting a slight twang of Bonjela.
It's that slight, it's not even the aniseedy part of it, or not directly. That's what I love as well. You know, as you go on and you're talking, maybe it's to do with it mixing a little bit with the air. I guess your nose gets used to it in a different way. Something changes, and so every taste is consistent but different. Like if I have a little sip of this, I noticed this when I was having it and ruminating on Belly being wonderful and Feed the Tree. When I breathe out, I could actually almost taste the kind of tree aspects, the piney aspects of it a little bit more. I mean, obviously,
I'm getting slightly more of the pininess with a bit of water added to it as well.
Yeah. I think it does. You know, it opens things out. But I do think as well, reading these, I would say particularly with this one, and thinking about Belly and that sort of, you know, early to mid 90s era of music, which was very much when I would have been trying to hide the taste of whiskey with Iron Brew. It would have been okay.
Oh, so right,
was, which works really well actually. But you know, I don't want to hide the taste of Iron Brew or whiskey anymore. But that was the closest I could find. But there's something about reading these, because I read them before I had the whiskey, right?
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
Like, at
quite
the same
a good
time
idea
as,
sometimes.
At the same time as, but also I would do that. And literally, as I was doing it, I thought, this is a bit like what it felt like growing up in Stirling. Okay, reading, and I read them from cover to cover. I had an older stepbrother, who always had all the Yankees. Okay, so I'm still in Smash
NME,
Hits
Melody Maker, and Sounds,
right?
And if someone else could get it as well, Record Mirror,
exactly. Every one of them was in, and they were all up at my dad's. That's where he stayed. So whenever I went up, there were always the new issues. And then eventually he left home because he was a good bit older than me. And then I got my own. That was it. That's what I got, and I would just sit at the back of class, and I would read them from cover to cover.
Me too.
And I loved the descriptions, but mainly I was reading descriptions of bands that I had no way of hearing ever. Okay?
This is the difference with the internet. Now, if people are listening or watching this podcast and they're going, oh, Nina Simone, oh, Belly, they can go to the playlist which we're putting together of all the guests on Malts and Music. We put their 5 choices back to back, so you can listen to everything that's been covered on this podcast. But you can also listen to anything that's ever been recorded, pretty much.
Exactly.
Whereas I was exactly the same. I'd see these exotically named bands and go, these sound great, or they sound ridiculous, or whatever. How do I find them? I mean, obviously record shops, but even then,
I'd make my mind up. You know, I'd already know who. I'd be like, nah, I definitely think I like, for example, Mazzy Star. Actually, okay, that's a fairly tame example. I reckoned I like Ned's Atomic Dustbin. Like, I had no idea. I mean, that was a good name, right? They had a good logo, which I drew everywhere before I'd ever heard anything of Ned's Atomic Dustbin. So at any point, and the other thing was, I couldn't even go into Stirling and buy this music because they didn't have it in our price.
Yeah.
Occasionally, when I was a bit older and I could start to go to gigs, any name I even remotely recognised, I'd be through. Mainly in Glasgow, but Edinburgh.
There's a good shop in Stirling now, though, isn't there?
Europa is absolutely wonderful. You need to come through and spend. Well, we need to spend at least one day.
Yeah, spend the inheritance
huge
on
vinyl
records in
It's
Europa.
like a separate room through the back of vinyl, and you know, it's a bit like this in that I think there's something to be said for sort of committing to doing something in the nicest sense. So like actively setting aside some time and going, this is what we're going to do, right? We're just going to sit and maybe drink a couple of whiskies and tell some stories, or we're just going to ransack, you know, the boxes at Europa and be open to what is on offer. And it's everything, by the way. It's like every genre, it's every era, but you never know exactly what you're going to get, and it's never going to be the same in 2 days.
And also, I think with vinyl collecting now as well, it's become a little fetishistic for some people. But I think ultimately, real music fans who like the sound and feel and look of vinyl, they want to collect and have a nice vinyl collection.
Yeah.
And just as someone will spend a lot of money on an nice bottle of whiskey or an unusual bottle of whiskey, people will also spend. I bought a reggae record by Sister Nancy.
Yeah.
Her album 1 2.
Oh.
I've been looking for that for years, and someone on Facebook actually sort of went, "Oh, I'm getting rid of some records," and put a list up, and I went, oh, "He's got the Sister Nancy record," and I paid more than I probably should have done for it.
I'm not great at that either. Like, I'm not great at, because once I get it into my head,
I want
becomes
that, and
quite,
that's it.
It does become quite of a sort of like an obsession that I kind of have to get it. So speaking of Tanya Donnelly, and speaking of therefore the Breeders, and speaking of the Breeders album Pod, which of course was recorded here in Edinburgh,
yeah,
right?
That's right. Palladium Studios.
Palladium, yeah. And they all stayed in Grangemouth. A lot of them stayed in Grangemouth when they were there. Yeah, because there's a Cocteau Twins connection
because of
so,
4 AD, the label.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So they were also, or a lot of them were shipped to and fro Grangemouth, recorded Pod. Anyway, I think it was earlier this year, the Breeders reissued Pod. Now I have Pod on all formats.
Yes.
However, they announced that they were doing a limited edition reissue on a particularly lovely shade of pink vinyl, and it was a nice 180 heavyweight
pressing, right.
pressing. And I noticed about it too late. Now, so it was a fairly decently priced album, 23 quid or whatever, but I got it into my head that I really needed to get it, even though...
And then you start looking on auction sites and all the rest of it.
I can't go into the details. Actually, it wasn't that bad, but it was a lot over the asking price, but I kind of had to have it. So even on that very basic level, and that's not the extreme end of the spectrum, which would get
I'm
me
so
divorced.
glad you're saying this, because I try not to go into this world too much, because if I start bidding on records, my life will be over.
No, I can really fall down that, I was going to say rabbit hole, but it's more like a bottomless pit. Very, very quickly.
A never-ending black hole.
And there you go. So yeah, Tanya Donnelly, via her various musical permutations and their off-spins, are still sending me...
Feed the Tree by Belly is spicy and sweet. It's a great tune.
It's a great tune.
Because you chose it for this whiskey, I had a listen to it, which I hadn't listened to it for years, actually.
Yeah.
And remembered, it took me back to that time as well. We did a special on kind of grunge and Nirvana and 30 years of Nevermind for the BBC fairly recently, and we were talking about, wearing your DMs and your kind of oversized. Look, I am grunge.
I purposely didn't wear my Docs today because I slip on the way down the Royal Mile on my way to the Tun. It's even when it's not icy, it's like really greasy. So these are my safety boots, or else, I'd be sat here in my Docs and you'd be in your tartan shirt.
I might be older, grayer, and flabbier, but I've got my plaid shirt
You're rocking
on.
it. You're absolutely rocking it.
It's but it took me back to that time.
Yeah, it's timeless. And I think again, not to sort of labour the point, but I think there's so much about that. There are lots of things which you can say that about. It could be a book that you open. It doesn't even need to be the entire book. A line, the feeling it can give you from a completely different part of your life is so powerful. Or a bit of chewing gum, or a whiskey, or a single, and the other thing is they keep acquiring new sort of magical properties as time goes on. It's not like it's a finite thing, right?
I mean, going through, I left school in 1990, so the 90s were absolutely fascinating, and just a rush of blood to the head, in every way, shape or form. I saw so many incredible bands, including Belly, actually. But you're living through it. You're not thinking this is a halcyon age.
No.
You look at the 50s and the 60s or the 70s and go, oh, those are the days. I think there was so much great music in every era and every decade. But now, looking back at the 90s 30 years later, I'm kind of going, whoa.
It breaks my heart even to think about the Casrock, okay? Even just to think that we took that place for granted. I saw you there, right? Amongst other places. We took that place for granted, right? Because you just do, right? Because what else are you going to do? That's all you know. And I mean, it's not that there were loads of amazing venues, but there's something about a place which just utterly encapsulated a point in time. And they did actually play loads of amazing female kind of punk and indie bands at that point as well. So I think probably I saw bands like Lungleg and Pink Cross and Gilded Lil, probably, like a lot of them through in Edinburgh, even though mainly they were maybe coming through from Glasgow. It just seemed you just went in there and something was happening. Few pints at the Tap of Lauriston, you know, into
game of
the
pool at the Cas.
Right, okay. So if something like that becomes like a, you know, it's just like a gateway back to a point in time. And it's not always to wallow in nostalgia, but I don't think at the same time there's anything wrong with sitting and going, that was great fun. And those were great tunes, and they still are.
I think I took it for granted at the time. I just thought, you know, and I listened back to a massive cross-section. It's you know, if you look at the 80s or the 70s, you see the huge cross-section of different genres that were happening. And the 90s was that, well, in a way, the sort of Lollapalooza generation of
It was. The alternative became the mainstream, right? But slowly. But there was loads underground.
But you know, it was hip hop, indie pop, metal, punk, ska, reggae, you know, everything, electronica, all coming together. And you maybe had your tribe, but you also dipped your toe into all the other tribes. I think I certainly did.
Totally.
Anyway.
But even if you think about a club at the time like the Mission, right? So okay, go in the Mission, and was it 3 or 4 floors they had, right? So within the one night, you'd pay your whatever £2. I think I saw you there as well, by the way.
Oh, you definitely would have seen me there.
Right? I got a free tape that night. Anyway. So you'd go to the Mission, and I can't even remember quite the way it was, but I think the top floor, as I recall, you went in and it was like industrial music, right? So it's just like wall to wall, Eisters End and Neubauten, or maybe for something commercial, 9 Inch Nails, you know.
Front 242, Nitsa Ed, you know.
Okay. So you'd start that. Bottles in UK Brown were about, I don't know, 20 pence or something like that. They were probably £1. Then you'd go down and there was a floor which was kind of like just the indie floor. Okay, so whatever was happening at that point, so Belly would have absolutely, you know, that had been blaring out, or any of the sort of indie into, I'd gone by really by the time of Britpop, I'd moved to London. But you know, all that sort of a thing, all the kind of indie hits, stuff that you'd hear on the chart show on your Saturday morning, brilliant. Then down in the basement, it was brilliant. It was like absolutely full on fluorescent hardcore rave music. So you could go to Pure, which I adored, but there was this weird encapsulation of all the sort of, or a lot of the subcultures. It was missing a reggae floor, I suppose. You know, because hip hop was very much part of the kind of indie thing at that point. Because you had your kind of Cypress Hills, and so you didn't have that. You didn't have the distinction so much.
Well, the early 90s, I remember, in terms of hip-hop, I remember, you know, people made a big fuss about Jay-Z headlining Glastonbury. I saw Public Enemy headline Reading, 30, 40,000 people, all jumping up and down. And, I mean, I've got nothing against Jay-Z. In fact, I think he's brilliant. I love loads of his records. But Public Enemy, come on.
Totally. And the other thing
Trailblazers.
I know, but also, not just Trailblazers, they totally know, without patronising, how to play the crowd. Did you see the last time they played the ABC? And, you know, Chuck D's there in his kilt, not being cheesy, but just absolutely owning it, you know, going, right, here I am. So it's just that thing of always being, like, they're such a powerful and such an important band in terms of the voice they gave, the activism, but also totally brilliant showmen as well. Amazing.
But and obviously, you know, black culture, American, UK, European, African, everyone was into Public Enemy, but it crossed over to rock-loving, indie-loving, white audience as well. And it was, I mean, that's what music does, though, doesn't it? It sort of it brings people together.
It totally bloody has to, because loads of things don't, right? Everything else is polarising people. So it's like, can we just all shut up and get back on the dance floor? We can't at the moment. That's a bloody problem.
Here, Nicola Meighan.
And dance off. That is going to resolve everything.
So we're 2 whiskies down. I think I don't know
and
how,
I'm already
how you get on.
challenging you to a dance off.
No, that's
I'm
great.
done. I'm done. Yeah.
Right. Oh, good. Good.
I'm going to say I'm like saving myself sips for my my train home. Just a little sips, because I'm going to listen to my songs.
Oh, are you?
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going in full here.
You're doing the full thing.
But that's fine. It's not a competition.
I've got to say these. Also, you know, let's not make any bones. Oh, which one are we on? Are we on Midsummer Night's Dream?
Yes, Midsummer Night's Dream is the next dram. I'm going to do a little bit of sound design here. Oh, listen to that glass filling up there with beautiful nectar.
But I should say...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
Right, this guy is a pro. And I'm going to say briefly, Vic Galloway, can we just talk a little bit about the colour?
This is, if the last 2 were, you know, kind of almost lemony and sort of citrusy in colour. This is a thick, treacly.
It is utterly
beautiful.
It's gorgeous. I mean,
So
without being shallow, aesthetically, whiskey is a beautiful drink. Okay,
Yeah.
it just is. It just looks gorgeous. It promises warmth, and it totally delivers.
And you mentioned a decanter. Now, you know, the wrong decanter can look a bit cheesy, but when you see a decanter full of really nice whiskey, it's just so tempting, isn't it?
Yeah, and also you just don't know when you're at the bottom of the bottle, right? So it's just like you just keep pouring it.
So this is part of the deep, rich and dried fruits flavour profile. It is Midsummer Night's Dream. It's a Speyside. The cask is first fill ex Oloroso hogshead. It's aged 12 years and it is 63.3%. Goodness me. Right, so a few of the flavour notes, the profile notes. This was dark, mysterious, and outright scary. Banana, mummified in a sarcophagus wrapped in linen with the ritual of embalming papyrus with figs, dates, and cloves as grave goods. That's brilliant. I love the way they write these.
Me too. This one in particular, it's utterly magical, and that absolutely rings true with the flavour as well. I mean, you even have a sip of that. You smell it. You think you know where you are with it, right? And it's so rich. It's really treacly.
It's got a treacle nose. I mean, it's got a treacle nose.
It's weirdly not heavy. I mean, I'll sometimes find myself, and not so much now, but you know, during the years when I was trying to mask the flavour of whiskey, I'd sometimes take a smell and I'd be like, oh, you know, like, oh, it's too. Whereas this is, it's
got a sweetness but a saltiness as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that, you know, perfect sort of treacle, you know, molasses, that kind of.
But there's a real kind of smoothness to it as well.
Yeah, I'm going in.
There's no direct edge, even though it's supposedly outright scary, which I think it probably is.
Oh,
right.
It's funny because I enjoy all of the flavour profiles, but I found when I'm in the Scotch Malt Whisky Society as a mere punter, just having a few drams, maybe having a bite to eat, enjoying the fire, enjoying a comfy leather armchair, and then I decide to buy a bottle. I'm finding myself moving increasingly towards the deep, rich and dried fruits profile. I don't know, it's I think because of this kind of dram, like this kind of rich, smooth, sweet but salty. It is figs, it is dates.
And you just cannot rush it. No. Right, you can't.
Although I probably will.
Speaking as a pint drinker, right, you just can't. It's like, it makes you, in a way, and I think this is another thing about, I think about whiskey drinking, and as I say, I speak very much as someone who, I've actually on a couple of occasions consciously not delve too much into whiskey, basically with the rationalisation that, you know, I know enough drinks already. I don't really need another vice, shall we say, or another obsession, given we've already talked about record buying.
If you're going to spend hundreds of pounds on records, you can easily do that on whiskey.
But there is something about sitting here in a way that I wouldn't sit here with you, and like, I don't really drink spirits other than if we're doing something like this. I've been through them all, including absinthe, and that only happened once.
I'd never tried absinthe.
The Portuguese police were involved, and that was the end.
Okay, great. Is that a story you can tell on camera?
It's not even. It's just a, you know, the invincibility cloak that alcohol can give you. So absinthe, I learned, gives you that, but also it doesn't have hallucinogenic properties, but it heightens that sort of invincibility cloak. So I climbed a scaffolding singing Shakira's whenever, and then it stole a moped. Standard,
nothing wrong with that.
And I was on tour with Moby and various people at the time who all, of course, didn't discourage me, which didn't help.
Right. Well, that brings us beautifully, towards our next song, which accompanies this particular dram. So, Midsummer Night's Dream, and you've gone for Goldfrapp Utopia.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier on that you worked for Mute. This was released on Mute. First and foremost, let's talk about the song, because it's a work of art.
Isn't it an utterly beautiful song? So, I've been working at Mute for a little while. Don't ask me, I don't have a great deal of concept of time in my 20s, but I'd been there for some time. And we were working on various albums, everything from a Fad Gadget box set to Moby's Play album, which was like at #1 in the charts at the time, and was just an absolutely massive deal. It hadn't been selling very well, and then it sold great, and it just went from there, and it was crazy. But there were loads and loads of other albums on the way, so there was a new Erasure album we worked on. Depeche Mode brought out a new record, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. This is all at the same time. This is all just like my day to day, which is madness. It's lovely. But there was a woman in who was at that point recording an album, and with a couple of the guys from Ad-N2X, who were a sort of industrial electro.
I love them, yeah. I've got a few of their records.
Did you ever get sent the Ad-N2X First Aid Kit? So they had this album called First Aid Kit. So I was in charge of all the merchandise amongst many other things. So they had this new album. This is Ad-N2X called Add Insult to Injury.
I remember that.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you remember the video for it, which was, I think Johnny Trunk directed it, but it was basically a softcore porn.
Oh no, I didn't. I don't remember that.
They built something for it. Can I swear? Should I not swear?
Let's give a swear warning. There's about to be some swearing. We apologise. Turn off your podcast now if you're offended by these things.
They built a fucking machine, right? And we sat in a boardroom, and it was basically a sort of giant pink dildo on a piston, which was part of the video.
Right.
And so, and there was a Lazy Susan in the middle of the boardroom table. So we were all sat there having this conversation about marketing this album while the sort of piston kind of, and then it just hung about in the office. You know how things do. Everybody loses
that's
interest.
That's the machine.
Fucking machine. Yeah.
yeah.
So, but as part of it, they were like, so add insult to injury, and so we put together these first aid kits, which were full of sex toys and. You know,
you know what? I do love like a ridiculous promo item.
Right, exactly.
But I didn't get sent one of those.
Well, there's a few in the loft.
Oh, really? Next to the chewing gum and the desiccated
Next to
lime.
Herbie Flowers lime and Peter Gabriel's teaspoon. That was another one, by the way.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, yeah. So anyway, so they'd been in with that, and then Alison Goldfrapp was in recording our debut album.
Felt Mountain.
So, yeah, right. So,
which I think sounds better now than it did at the time, weirdly enough. I think it's aged so beautifully, that record.
It was weirdly prescient, I think, in a lot of ways, that album, strangely. And Will Gregory, who was with Alison, I mean, he's just like the most incredible composer, but her voice was just utterly beautiful. But we didn't hear anything for a long time. She was upstairs in the studio, and she'd just come down, and who's that girl? What's she doing? All the rest of it. And then we heard, the first song was Lovely Head, which was the first single, which was glorious. But Utopia was... I mean, it felt like something you'd been hearing for your whole life, and also like nothing you'd heard before.
It's like sort of John Barry and Ennio Morricone. It's got that cinematic mass, specifically John Barry, I think. It's got those kind of chord changes, which I am utterly addicted to. You know, it's just sweeping, grandiose, and yet melodically rich and kind of intimate as well.
Yeah.
And this song's it's kind of about eugenics and fear of kind of totalitarian fascism. And
I think there were always like so many different layers in terms of what something was or wasn't, and where they were going for with it. But the other thing was about Utopia, and this particular one, which is Midsummer Night's Dream. I mean, there was actually an aspect of not asking exactly what it is, if you like, or what it's about. It's like almost... It's a sense of something. So you kind of get a vague idea of it being in a place and time, and there's magic involved, and there's a bit of weirdness, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and there may or may not be hallucination, and you just go with it. And I think there's something about the potency of this particular whiskey that's a bit like that. You know, there's bits in it where, you know, Alison Goldfrapp talks about being... I'm wired to the world. That's how I know everything. And I think I get a bit like that after a certain number of drinks. I go, you know, I have this like lucidity.
Yes.
You know? I just get it.
I might be a bit like that by the end of this podcast, to be honest. There is something epic and grandiose and kind of sweeping about this dram as well. It's rich. It's, you know,
it's utterly unmistakable as well. And I think that's the other thing. Okay, they came out of nowhere, and you're right. They were completely unlike anything else. This cinematic, operatic, widescreen cabaret that they brought to the table in 2001 was, well, they were up for the Mercury Award the same year as PJ Harvey won it for Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea. And it was one of our goals, because when we literally started, there wasn't even a logo. Like, we started with this logo, Goldfrapp, which we plastered around lampposts all over London, to try and get the name into people's heads, because we thought it was a slightly odd name.
Yeah.
And it went brilliantly. But the first time they ever played live was at the Raymond Review Bar in London, which was a beautiful plush strip
I've been
club,
there a
right?
few times.
Gentleman's bar.
Yeah.
And
for record promotional young bands,
only.
not for the other stuff they do there.
And I drank whiskey that night, because it felt really classy there. So even then, I had some sort of an association.
So you're hearing
right?
this song live for the first time and drinking
it was
a fine whiskey.
It was a Lagavulin I had, and the Lagavulin, because that was my dad's favourite at the time, right? I'm very much like, I associate it with people. John, my husband, likes a Talisker, so I think there's a lot of whiskey that's about that. I do think there's a lot that's about association and closeness to people, and what you're, how that feels. Even going back to, as you say, being a kid and then liking the smell of whiskey on someone's breath, which would be appalling. It could be quite comforting. So Utopia's playing, and I do remember, because I was like, there were bunny girls selling cigarettes, because you could do that. And Alison Goldfrapp sang this stunning version of Utopia, and I remember going, I don't feel it very often, like ever, even now, but I remember thinking, yeah, I kind of feel like I could feel classy tonight, and I think it's because I've got like a whiskey, and not like 2 pints.
I mean, this is quite different from a Lagavulin, but I think it could give you a sense of class if you were standing there in Raymond's Review Bar. Or
I just felt, so it was like a statement to order a whiskey, like a proper, not just a whiskey, a name.
It's funny. I hope. Well, I'm absolutely certain that the Scotch Malt Whisky Society and lots of single malts throughout the world and distilleries and so on are dispelling that myth of whiskey's a kind of hard man's drink.
Yeah,
because nowadays,
totally.
if I go into a bar and that's pretty much what I drink, I might have a beer or a glass of wine every now and again, but I more often than not go for a whiskey now. You? And people some people get taken aback. Oh, whiskey at this time of night, and it's just like, well, and then most people are not like that, but you do occasionally get someone going, wow, it's still it has a kind of, I don't know, it has a sort of attitude that accompanies it somehow.
Yeah. No, I always, if I ordered it, it was sort of like as a badge of, and not particularly a patriotic thing, but I did think it gave me, which God knows I need, a little bit of class.
Oh, come on! I mean, this is a classy whiskey. If people are looking for this one,
I'm going to be consistent
Midsummer
and put a bit of water in it as well. And also just that idea, the whole theatrical aspect of that as well. Okay, the whole visual element of it. And again, looking at the whiskey or someone like Goldfrapp's music, particularly that wild, wonderful song, or of course, the Shakespeare reference, and just the uncertainty. There's a weird uncertainty about Midsummer, and is it dark and is it light, and what season is it, and I think that's a nice thing as well. It's like, it's quite nice to just sometimes surrender yourself and go, I don't know exactly what's going on, but I kind of love it. That's Utopia all over, right? That's Goldfrapp.
Yeah, I'm going to add some water to it, because
and the thing is, it keeps its rich colour, right? So
this is the most outstanding whiskey that we've had today, and that's not to say that the last two were bad in any way. They were absolutely delicious.
It's not.
This completely stands its ground, though, doesn't it?
And I think the other thing is, I'm someone who, I would love to be someone who, if you put me in a bar and did a sort of Pepsi challenge, and went, what's that? Now, I can't do that. Like John and my dad, my husband and my dad, so they'll, right now they do, on a Friday night, and it's a Friday night, that's what they do. They have their beer and their whiskey. And my dad's got a brilliant line, because John loves all sorts of very, very, very lovely whiskies, although he would usually go back to a Jura or a Talisker, or, as I say, Lagavulin, just again for traditional reasons has been my favourite. But my dad's always is like, what are we having this week, John? And then he'll have it and he'll go, oh, that's definitely my favourite. It's
quite esoteric, this whole podcast and this whole idea of matching 5 whiskies with 5 tunes. It could be these 5 which you've chosen.
Yeah,
Tomorrow
exactly.
you could drink these whiskies, or the day after, and pair them with another 5 or another 5 tunes. We all know that. It's a bit of fun, and it's nice finding the connections. And I totally see how Goldfrapp could go with it.
It's that other, slightly otherworldly and also utterly miraculous thing, which is something being conjured, okay? whether that's whiskey out of like raw ingredients or a song in general out of nothing, but a song like Utopia in, you know, at the turn of the millennium.
Yeah.
It's like
strange lyrical content, but beautifully done as well.
And this
I loved
voice.
it. I'm going to have a little sip of water to cleanse the old palate.
She at that Raymond Review Bar gig, she came under a bit of criticism in the reviews for being too perfect, you know, for her singing being too like the album, and it was just such a weird. So again, it's a bit like you just always going to be wrong-footed. You never really know, right? It was an amazing gig.
She always comes across, no matter what album they put out, no matter what press shot, no matter what stage performance she does, as a total stickler for intimate detail. She wants it perfect.
Yeah, I worked with her a lot on some early T-shirt designs, and I learned that firsthand. Yeah, and she's absolutely brilliant. She was very cute. In fact, I'll tell you what else I've got in my stash. I've got a packet of sugar that Alison Goldfrapp once brought me back from Portugal.
Wow.
With my name on it.
With your name on
Just
it?
Nicola, but yeah.
Right, okay.
That is my name.
Yeah.
I don't know, I keep these things. I feel like they do have some sort of I'm like a hoarder.
I don't think I am, but my girlfriend says I am.
I honestly, and you know the irony, my husband, who is an archaeologist, right, and you would think he would absolutely see the value, and who really knows the story of something for a long time or other. He would honestly have our house completely and utterly
empty
floored.
and minimal. Yeah.
He's like, we do not need that entire.
I'm trying to do that with stuff, but it's impossible.
I'm like, no, just put it
especially
somewhere.
with music.
It's put away, right? Yeah, never, no.
Right, let's move on to dram number 4. Like a lot of these podcasts, in fact, like I think all of them, they've ended up being a little bit longer than we expected.
Yes,
but that's what happens when you have
exactly.
five whiskeys. No, it's not you. It's just the nature of the beast. Yeah. So we're moving on to dram number 4, which is coconut.
Now I'm just going to have a quick.
Coconut
now,
is what it's being called.
What I particularly love about this moment is having spent time with these whiskies in this order, and I love that you just said for that one, Vic, that's really quite different. You know, there's a real contrast. I think in terms of, you know, because it's a variation on a theme, there's a lot more depth, but I think coconut. Now, I don't know about you, but I just always think of Malibu.
Right, yeah.
Which, by the way, a lot of love in my heart for Malibu.
Yeah.
And then I was introduced to a proper rum by a guy I think you know as well, a London friend of mine who launched that lovely venue, the Lumiere in Kilburn, Andy Ingalls.
I know him very well.
So Andy and I were big drinking pals in London, and he was a rum man. We'd go to gigs and I'd just be getting my usual pints, and he would have his own hip flask of really, really fancy Coco Canoe. That's what it's called. Oh yes, right?
Yeah, I've had that.
Okay, yeah, and it is beautiful. So when I saw this, I thought, I'm going to have to be wary here because I'm expecting Coco Canoe.
Yeah.
Now, where are we on the old...
Yeah, so this is a Lowland whiskey.
Uh-huh.
It's a second fill HTMC hogshead cask. It's 15 years old, and it is 61.6%.
Are whiskies more... Are whiskies higher in volume than I had realised? Like, are they stronger? Because I always think of spirits roughly being 40-ish.
Well, because these are single cask, I think they're slightly stronger than a lot of kind of even single malts that are on the market. So these are the whiskies that you might get, whether they be blends or even single malts, are often derived from the single cask versions. Yeah. So you're getting the absolute straight from the source perfect whiskey. Which is why everyone should be a member and enjoy, because you can either buy these whiskies online or come and enjoy them here.
No, genuinely, because it's wild. But the thing is, there's something about them. I don't know what it is. It's not that they're in any way repellent, not at all. But you don't want to drink them too fast. You're not going to get yourself into a position where you're like, oops, I just necked that. I just necked
62%. Yeah.
even by my standards, there's something that it's like the whiskey asks you to just let it breathe and take your time.
I know. This podcast is maybe not the way to do that. Mind you, I think you're being slightly more sensible than I am. But
I've got my train journey.
I've got my chops up. You see, I'm match fit.
You're
now.
getting ready for the dance off, right? Because remember,
yeah.
that's my idea for world peace, which I think is a very good one.
So this is the juicy oak and vanilla flavour profile, and here are just a few of the notes on the card here. Nosing neat, 3 C's came to mind. Caribbean, Calypso and coconut. Desiccated, toasted, ice cream and suntan lotion. Chewy heat on the palate, neat. Have you ever had grilled black pepper banana on sugared rum toast? And it goes on. I love all these. They're so good, aren't they?
Me too. I absolutely love them.
I love your journalism. I love your writing as well, because you shoot from the hip as a journalist, and you love language. And I could imagine you enjoying those.
Yeah, I do. I love it. Yeah, I hardly write at all at the moment, and I haven't for a long time. And I think maybe.
But I always enjoy your writing.
Thank you.
You connect deeply with the music and give people descriptions of whatever you're writing about, whether it be a live performance or an album or an interview, whatever. But you also go off into your own kind of.
But that's like this, right? That's the same thing, or that's music, right? In a way, that's the only way we can ever be, which is actually. Trying to be accessible to people and to communicate with people, but in being inherently sort of selfish as well, because it has to be your own story, right? Yeah. It has to be your own interpretation, which is why it's literally different for every single person. But I love to have a jumping off point, and I think these are great as jumping off points. And as I say, they do remind me of reading something and going, oh God, I have no idea what that band are, but I love them, right? There's something about them, there's something about that description. And yeah, that is like a love of language, but I think it's also a love of ideas, suggestions. And what I loved about this was, so I saw it and I can smell a bit of coconut. It's not overwhelming.
I'm on the nose at the moment. I haven't had a sip yet.
It's not overwhelming.
No, I'm not actually getting coconut on the nose.
I'm going to tell you a little magic trick. We'll see if it works for you.
Okay.
Have a sip. Okay?
Yeah.
Enjoy it. And then smell again.
Okay.
You'll smell coconut. It's like alchemy, Vic. Right?
Isn't that strange? That's brilliant. I'm getting coconut on the palate now, whereas I wasn't getting it on the nose, and now the nose is coconutty.
I know.
Coconutty.
It's so weird, right? It's not Malibu. It's not Cocoa Canoe.
It's
right?
definitely not Cocoa Canoe,
but it's definitely in there. And I really like that one for this one for that, because it's not overbearingly sweet.
And what I'm doing with this is I'm sort of playing with the taste and the fragrance and the fumes in a way on my palate. Yeah,
exactly.
Now, if the last one was quite overwhelmingly rich and epic, this is a lot more subtle.
And also, I think there definitely is I love this sort of references to suntan lotion and toasted coconut and ice cream and that holiday idea. There is something of that in there. There's something indefinable which just is transporting and is really quite uplifting, I think. So there's a lightness in it as well because of that.
And you've gone for, musically, to accompany this, you've gone for something light and effervescent in a way.
Well, quite. It's both, right? Exactly. And you know what started me off on that? It was mentioning the 3 C's. And I thought, there's only one C for me, and that's Candi Staton. Right?
Yeah.
Or Candi Staton, call it what you will. And I think that Young Hearts Run Free, which is my
soul disco classic,
song, right?
Heard on dance floors across the known universe ever since it was released in 1976.
Yeah, and our songwriter, the guy who wrote it for her, whose name I think was David Crawford, forgive me if I've misremembered that. She'd had a horrendous time at that point in her life. She was in an abusive relationship, and that's why I'm saying, there's always a darkness there as well. There's like, for it to even get to that colour, for it to get to that depth, you can delve in as much as you want, but you've got to come back up again. And he'd said to her, you need to get out of here, and he's like, I'm gonna write you a song that's gonna last forever. And he wrote Young Hearts Run Free. And so at its root, there's something so sort of profound and sincere and lovely about that, and yet again, to go back to another memory of drinking whiskey, and it was Talisker, because it was with John at the time. We were on the Renfrew ferry, and we'd brought Candi Staton over to play our first ever shows in Scotland. This was as part of Triptych.
Yeah, I remember. I saw her in the Bongo Club.
Yeah,
I think it was, on the same tour
we put
in
her in the
Edinburgh.
Bongo Club, the Tunnels in Aberdeen, and
I couldn't believe I was actually seeing her, and I wasn't that far away. I was like, I could
she nearly
reach
didn't
out
come.
and touch her.
She nearly didn't come because she thought no one would come to her shows. She'd never played in Scotland before, and she did all this promo for it, and she did all the interviews from her bed. So all the journalists were phoning up, and she just totally played the game. And we brought her back at least once, if not twice again, and she was stunning every time. But the Sunday night was when she played the Renfrew Ferry, and so again, and actually, truth be told, it was because we'd been out since whenever the Thursday or the Friday on Triptych thing. So by the Sunday, I was like, I don't think I can have any more beer. I don't know what I can. Whiskey, and my saving grace, and she played Young Hearts Run Free, and that boat, and it was April time, so it was kind of twilight, and it was absolutely glorious, and you felt like you were anywhere but there, and also completely and utterly where you were.
I actually saw some astonishing gigs in the Renfrew ferry, and it's a very strange. It's like a moored boat, so you can't. If people are dancing, you can feel it rocking a little bit.
Yeah,
but
totally.
Going back to Triptych, which was the festival that she played at, that was now it was Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Aberdeen. And so in a revolving cast of shows. Not everyone played every three cities, but by and large they did. And it was club nights and conversations and lots of live shows. It was wonderful. I was lucky enough to be involved in it a few times.
Totally, absolutely.
Ermin Schmidt from Cannes.
We brought over Karl-Heinz Stockhausen for the first time.
I saw Stockhausen.
Herbie Hancock.
Yeah.
Dr. Robert Moog, however you want to pronounce it, came over and did again, lots of these people had never been to Scotland before. Prince Buster, his wife, absolutely, she came in her slippers and she loved the Buckfast. Absolutely loved it. It was wonderful,
Buckfast,
right?
really?
Yeah, totally into the Buckfast. So was Einsters Ende Neubauten and Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds Blixa Bargeld.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Mind you,
that wasn't a Triptych, but yeah.
From all reports, he sounds like the sort of guy that might be into.
He's
a
an
Buckfast.
absolute legend. He'd wanted Rioja Reserva, but I was in Sauchiehall Hall Street. I dragged them up to do some TV thing, and I couldn't find that. So I was like,
yeah, Buckfast will do you, mate.
But yeah, Triptych
actually,
was amazing.
this is really delicious.
Yeah, I just went with it because he's got a great sense of humour. People miss that a lot of the time, right? It's that funny thing. So yeah, but Grace Jones came over for it.
Oh. All of these, I went to the vast majority.
Chuck D did loads going back to Public Enemy. Yeah.
The vast majority of these people you mentioned, I saw them, and they were in relatively small venues. I mean, it might be 1,000 people there, but I mean, you don't think that in your lifetime you'll be able to see them in your hometown or your neighbouring town or whatever, playing in front of a relatively small crowd, and nailing it as well.
Yeah. We brought Laurie Anderson over to do a few things, and I remember on the next morning being at Waverley Station, and Laurie Anderson, walking through Waverley Station with that beautiful sun-like face, looking at the board and just thinking, how did this happen? How are you even here? How are you even human?
Yeah.
Wonderful, Yeah. But Candi Staton certainly from that time, and literally, honestly, I saw the letter C, and somewhere deep in my sort of psyche, I'm like, yeah, she's just an absolute joy. And that song, unlike this, right? It's utterly escapist, and yet it's utterly where you are. Yeah. Right? There's something about that.
Oh yeah, no, and Young Hearts Run Free is definitely an escapist tune, but it's also the tale of every second person in society.
Yeah, totally. This is actually where we are as well, though, right?
It goes well with this because this is quite playful. This whiskey.
I think playful is exactly the right word, and actually, I think that about a few of them. I think that a bit like someone like Einsters Ende Neubauten not being understood enough for his lovely, lovely, charming humour. Sometimes whiskey can just be seen as being abrasive or brash. Or all edges, and it's anything but. And also, every single one of these has had a completely different.
I'm adding a bit of water now, just to try and see
variety of flavours and ideas. Like I say, I'm not enough of an expert. I couldn't have gone like super deep in terms of thinking about this because I'm not technical enough. I'm not even technical enough a thinker to do that. But the ideas that came were inspired by these drinks, you know?
The Whisky Society wouldn't have employed me if they wanted an absolute expert on whiskey. I'm a fan. I'm learning more about it.
Part. Yeah.
But I'm a fan. I'm a music guy, and you're a music person as well. So it's like you know exactly why we're here. But it's the combination of drinking these whiskies, which are all quite different, with these different kinds of tunes as well. You know, so.
Yeah, exactly, because it's not just one thing, and it's not just one time or one place, although quite often I will associate a certain whiskey with a certain place. So I love Jura because that's somewhere that we quite often go on holiday, or you know, like if there's a particular place where you go, again, I think you can latch onto something. You can your emotion can inform your affection towards it.
Mm-hmm. Now, just taking a little detour for people enjoying the chat and listening to the playlist on Spotify and so on. You mentioned that you worked at Mute, and I know you've got loads of great stories about that. But you're now a journalist, which we've talked about a bit, and a broadcaster as well. Where can people sort of find you?
Well, that was sort of by accident. That was kind of thanks to you, because you'd asked me to, you and Mandy had asked me, your producer at the time, Mandy Freeman, to you know, come and have a chat on your show, and which I did, and then Mandy kind of said, oh, you know, do you want to come in and have another little chat? I met you at Aidan Moffat. Remember that weird Unravel thing they had? Was that what it was?
Yeah.
Remember they had that, or what was the thing where you could have an interactive
That was a whiskey involved.
Yeah, it was. I was about to say we were drinking whiskey that night. Yeah, Jura's. Right?
Jura's whiskey. It was a single malt, and it was specifically tied up with. They were very pro supporting Scottish bands and art projects.
They did a load of great stuff. Yeah. So we had a chat then, and you said, oh, Mandy was wondering maybe one time when I'm off, you could maybe dip. So I actually tried it and then said to Mandy, no, I think that would be a terrible idea. Thank you anyway. And she went, we'll just see. And that was kind of the start of it. It was sort of an accident that was a very, very lovely surprise. No, I never have thought of myself.
But the thing is, Nicola, you know your onions, you know your stuff inside out. Whether it be music or pop culture, art, literature, all sorts of different things, and you speak really clearly and confidently, and you've got like, you know, attitude and fun, like just
that's lovely.
Coming out of
Thank you.
So it's like it's you know,
a door. Have more of that whiskey.
A door opens and you have to go through it. And
yeah, right.
So but now you're established.
Yeah, totally. So that was kind of, I guess that was my sort of door in. I'm picturing it almost like something in Alice in Wonderland, you know, like you don't know quite what's happening. It's just like open this and I'm not sure whether I'm down a warren or up there or where you are or what size you are or what you're in a lovely way. But yeah, so I eventually through another series of lovely sort of happenstances, I suppose, I ended up doing afternoon stuff, so more cultural stuff. So yeah, Friday afternoons, the afternoon show. And it's everything, so it's arts, entertainment, it could be books, it could be comedy, it could be heavy metal, it could be Shakespeare. Right?
Great.
It's whatever's there and loads of
I can't think of anyone better to deal with Shakespeare on one day and heavy metal on the next, or both in the same show.
Yeah, quite, exactly. Thank you very much. But yeah, so it's great fun. But it's weird as well, because I think when something sort of happens that I wouldn't have dared dream of when I was back listening to Belly and hiding the flavour of whiskey and desperately wanting to be a music journalist, like that's all I ever wanted to be. I was very clear on that for a very, very long time. There was no doubt that it would never have occurred to me. The radio, oh my God, no. You know, that was like way beyond.
It didn't occur to me either. Yeah. It was not something, I sort of fell into it as well. And but now I sort of see how it makes perfect sense. I love music. I'm nerdy about it, and hopefully can speak fairly clearly.
Oh, totally.
And just kind of like obsess about the details, but hopefully can relay
of course that's
my
the whole
enthusiasm
point, right?
to other people.
Yeah, that's why, you know, people listen to you and they're like, right, okay, I now want to go and find out about that band.
Yeah.
Because, and that goes back to, I think, us reading all those, like literally, down to reading the classifieds.
Look, if there's anyone listening or watching this that knew me as a teenager or even previous, you know, as basically from about the age of about 8, 9, 10 years old onwards, it was just, I poured over it, and I sort of still do, to be honest.
Yeah.
In a slightly different way now, as a man in his late 40s.
I honestly think that's why I got such a funny little kick out of this, because I think the other thing is, at that point, that was quite an alien world to me. Or not alien, but because I felt like, I definitely wanted to be a part of it, the whatever that was going on in the Melody Maker and NME, and what was going on in music. But also, it's the idea that you want to know more about it. And I definitely have that. I don't necessarily know it's...
Well,
it'll do me.
You know, we're here talking about music, but we're also talking about whiskey. And if I've spent a lifetime nerding out about music, I've certainly spent a good few years, maybe even decades, nerding about whiskey. And I'm really getting into it now.
And I use it as my sort of... I've just realised, you know, during this conversation, that I've kind of used it, you know, to, in some ways, maybe insinuate, bolster my credibility a bit at times when, right, so like giving myself a bit of class at that first Goldfrapp concert, or, you know, that Sunday night at the Candi stand, saying, yeah, you know, I think I just need to make them, it's almost like ceremonialising things a little bit more, right? This is a moment, I'll get a whiskey. Right, so I've been doing that sort of inadvertently. It means something to me that I didn't really quite realise or articulate maybe until this chat. And it's funny, you know.
I added some water to this guy, the cocoa nut, the juicy oak and vanilla, and it's brought. I think it's brought out the kind of sweetness. It's taken some of the slightly harder edges off it, which water normally does, but it's brought out the sweetness and the coconut.
Right. The coconut makes itself more present somehow. It insinuates its way in. Isn't it great? And by the end, you're like, how could I not taste that coconut?
I know. That's
or
exactly
smell it.
what I'm thinking right now.
It's blindingly, it's like...
Well, I'm dancing to some disco, soul disco, courtesy of
We're at the
Candi.
Renfrew Ferry. We've got our coconut. Candi Staton is there.
It's brilliant, and I really urge anyone who's watching or listening to go and search out the playlist on Spotify. Whisky Talk, Malts and Music, all the guests who've been on the podcast, they choose 5 tracks which go with the 5 whiskies. We've got them all in a playlist. The playlist is building as the series goes on. So we're on to the final dram.
I'm sitting here laughing, Vic, at the fact that we thought we were like, right, we'll just try and take it to an hour and that'll be fine. I don't know what the time is now. Okay,
I think it's well over an hour. I would imagine we're into. So we might have to say goodbye during this dram, just for the sake of our dear listeners and viewers.
Do you know what? That's kind of apt.
Yes. Okay, so this one is Fruit Alloy, which is a very strange title for any food or drink.
I'm quite fascinated in the difference even between, okay, you smell it a little bit in the bottle, it's there, and then you give it the courtesy of a, which I've not always done in the past, it has to be said, the courtesy of a glass.
So this is a sweet, fruity and mellow flavour profile. It's a Highland whiskey. It's a second fill ex-bourbon barrel. It's aged 19 years, which is quite something, and it's 57%, which is strong enough, especially at this stage in the game, Nicola. I'm sure people watching are going, they've just polished off 4 whiskies in about 5 minutes.
70%, not quite. But,
No. So, a few of the tasting notes. The panel agreed. A sublime nose, a superb collision of cough medicines and freshly muddled garden herbs. We found all manner of things like wintergreen, fennel, mango salsa, papaya, apricot, green banana, tinned pineapple, and the leftovers of a big mushy fruit salad. Again, the notes go on, but right here I'm going in for the nose.
Honestly, you absolutely must.
It's fruity.
There is something.
It's funny how something that's made of ultimately grain and water can actually smell fruity.
I've not gone to whiskey tastings, okay? That's not a thing I've done. Like, John has my dad? No, because my dad's just very much a lovely open, this is my favourite now.
Oh, yeah.
But like John, my uncle John, my husband John, my cousin Duncan, who I mentioned. It's interesting that I'm mentioning the men, but I don't necessarily think this is a male pursuit at all. But I do think in a family tradition, and quite a traditional working class family, the men would maybe have the drink at a point. So
I think the world is changing.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so
having yourself here and Stina Tweedale from Honey Blood.
Yeah. So I'm telling a family story, but I don't think that in any way kind of reflects where we are now. However, they'll come back, and so they can then. I suppose what we're doing here is like the loveliest version for me of that thing, right? So I'm learning to appreciate the different layers, depths, details of the flavour, but also it's done in such a way where I'm not feeling, because I'm not that good at being told what to do. Really,
yeah.
So
I've never
you can
been
have
that great
right.
at being told what to do either.
So you know, you can have that one next. Right, this is what you should taste in this one. Have that. That's not really. I'm not particularly into like organised fun, and so like a whiskey tasting to me is maybe a wee bit too regimented for my personal ways. What I'm getting from this, I think, is what people maybe get from that sort of thing. In that you appreciate the difference every time, but you taste. Like, how are those drinks the same?
Well, it's astonishing.
Right?
This is what's blowing my mind increasingly about.
And I'm a Luddite, I would say, in this.
Well, but being involved with the Whisky Society, I'm finding myself tasting the same drink and it tasting completely different.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not talking like a bad quality whiskey and a good quality whiskey. You're talking about all of these high quality whiskies, and they all taste completely different.
Yeah, totally.
It's the same with high quality sherry or wine or anything that you cheese. You'll find those nuances and so on. But these are quite spectacular.
Yeah.
Right, I'm having a sip of this. I can't wait any longer. So this is the fruit alloy, sweet, fruity, and mellow. Really fruity on the nose. Let's go in.
While you're having a wee taste, I'm going to pinpoint some of the flavour notes that I particularly loved from this one, and they are this. Vapour rubs, copper kettles, and steel wool and engine oils. Right, so this actually takes me right back to the start. This takes me back to my earliest memories of whiskey and what it represented and what it was, and that's family gatherings, old-fashioned, properly Scottish get-togethers at New Year, right? That was the time, that was maybe the only time when some of the family would drink, and it was like working hands, it was people coming in, it was my granddad coming in and washing his builder's hands with fairy liquid and sugar, right, to striptease vest,
to get some grit in there,
right, in the kitchen sink, in their council house, to kind of like properly clean themselves. And so all of those things, the steel wool and the vapour rub, I was always like, I had like whooping cough as a kid, and so I was constantly like wheezing and all the rest of it. So it was like, slap that Vicks vapour rub on you. My mum swears by it as a cure for everything now, by the way. It transpires it's not very good for sunburn under your eyes, as my wee boy and wee girl discovered in Spain recently. Blindingly painful. However, so the vapour rub, so you have these wonderful sort of like family cures and family traditions and everything going into this drink. So this to me is the most traditional one.
Well, as someone who's just had a big, sip of it, having had the fruitiness on the nose, and there is some fruitiness in the taste, I'm also getting that slight metallic taste. I hadn't read beyond the tasting notes beyond that bit that I read out, and there you say copper kettle, steel wool, pine resin, engine oils, vapour rubs. I'm getting a bit of that now. Now I don't I'm not going to lie. Sometimes the tasting notes go off in tangents, and I'm like, I'm not getting that. But on this one, I get on one hand the fruitiness, and on the other hand the kind of slightly metallic.
It is. There's like some sort of a base note to it, but weirdly it's not harsh. No. Right? Why is that? There's something almost comforting about that. I think for me it's because I have these weird associations with, I don't know what that thing is,
Some people will have that, you mentioned Bonjela or anything medicinal. Some people will have that kind of straight away. But sometimes, I don't drink cough syrup. I'm not one of those people. But
I have done, and this is a lot nicer.
But there's something comforting about a sort of a cough syrup or a Lemsip or something that's medicinal. Sometimes not only does it sort of give you that feeling like I'm going to be better soon, or this is going to help me out, but you actually over the years you get used to those things. So I think sometimes those, even
if it's horrible, it's nice. Yeah, exactly.
I like Cavonia. Some people go,
I'm a big fan of Cavonia, although, I did go through that phase round about the time I was disguising the whiskey where, you heard it was good, but by then they'd taken out anything that was even remotely, alcoholic or, soporific about it. So we'd be just drinking these bottles of Benylin or whatever and just feeling violently ill and nothing else, literally nothing.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to ensure that you know that this does not taste like Benylin or Cavonia or a cough syrup.
Further from it. It's lovely.
But it has that slightly metallic medicinal thing that's combined with that fruity light, fun.
So to me, this is family New Year parties, right?
Wow. So you've gone for... Oh, I looked at my notes there, but I should have known. Of course I knew.
You did.
Barbara Dickson.
January, February.
You are... I wouldn't say the world's greatest, but you're definitely flying the flag for Barbara Dickson ever since I've met you.
Yeah, I totally and utterly. I love her. That was Barbara.
That was Barbara. That was the ghost of Barbara.
Yeah, I totally love her, and part of it is rooted in my childhood. It's literally of those early memories of, you know, very sort of like traditional family New Year's. My mum was the youngest of a big family, Uncle John being the eldest. We've touched on him already. And so there was like the best part of 20 years between them. And so my grandparents were quite a bit older. They were almost like a generation beyond. And so the New Year's I had were probably the same New Year's that people who were born a couple of decades earlier, maybe in the 50s or the 60s, 40s even, which was my mum, would recognise. And so a lot of it was the Corries. The Corries were my...
Who you also adore.
Yes, I do.
And you know them as well.
Ronnie Brown is an absolutely lovely man. And I have shared many...
A dram.
Not just a dram. A whiskey and tonic.
Oh, wow.
With Ronnie Brown. That's his wee drink. A whiskey and tonic, right? We above an exotic insight there. Yeah.
Yes, I don't think I've ever had one of those.
Yeah, a whiskey and tonic. And so we had those. But Barbara, to me, represents the sort of traditional family thing, and also just that idea of, I just was blown away she was from Scotland. I mean, it's blatantly obvious, but I just thought, because she was a huge pop star at the time.
Well, we're talking about, I know him so well with Elaine Page. Massive. I mean, that was globally massive as well.
Utterly beyond
but
huge.
She was a huge pop star, albeit for a certain market. You're not going to get your young punks listening to Barbara Dickson, but she came from the kind of folk revival scene of the 60s, right?
Absolutely. I mean, she was there with Jerry Rafferty, Rab Noakes, Billy Connolly. You know, she was absolutely in about that in Glasgow and in Edinburgh. Yeah.
And you know, all of the, Judy Collins and, all of the,
her voice is utterly beautiful.
Pentangle
she came
and so on and so on, all of those people,
She worked so closely with so many of the folk names that we love. And then in the sort of early to mid-70s became sort of like, if you like, encouraged a bit to go down the pop route, which was great for her. And so it
musical
was...
theatre.
Right, yeah. But even then, it was political musical theatre. It was Willie Russell's Blood Brothers, and he wrote the part of Mrs. Johnson for her. So this is not just not that I've got any issue with, it just being a musical. But this was something that had a real political point, and she was in for it. And her voice is just lovely. And it was actually the songs in the kind of late 70s and in the early 80s I loved. But January, February for me, for starters, what a song. Written by Alan Tarney, who among other things resurrected a-ha's Take On Me. a-ha would not have existed without them. This song would have been a flop.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Tell me more about this.
a-ha had released Take On Me in various incarnations, once or twice at least. And then Alan Tarney, who had been responsible for a lot of what I would say were Cliff Richard's greatest hits. You may argue that there are none of those to speak of. I would say that Wired for Sound.
I'd just like to take this point to apologise to the punks out there. Sorry, all you punks.
I'd like to take this opportunity to apologise to my own husband, who was, as you well know,
a punk rocker.
A well-known disco bride punk, Sinister Turkeys, Died Yourself Dizzy EP, played by John Peel in the 1970s or 80. And here we are talking about Alan Tarney and Cliff Richard. Anyway,
Alan
Tarney, So,
is he
amazing.
like the Jim Steinman in a way?
Sort of like of glossy late 70s, early 80s pop. Take On Me was not working. Tarney's like that. Give it to me. I mean, like literally like me now. Give it to me, boys. And he turned that into a hit. Love it or hate it. Alan Tarney's the man.
It's a pretty outstanding song. Take On Me.
And he wrote January, February. I mean, for that alone.
Mm.
And so this is my sort of this
here's
is my
Barbara Dickson.
Yeah, and here's to you.
And here's to you. And here's to all of the tracks that we've discussed and all the whiskies that we've drunk. Thank you, Nicola Meighan, for being part of Whisky Talk, for being part of Malts and Music. It's been Whisky Talking.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I love that we're pretending that we're going to say goodbye and not finish the rest of
when
the
these
Whiskies
cameras
now,
and microphones go off, we will be walking in different directions.
No.
But I urge anyone to go to the Spotify playlist, because all of my guests on this Malts and Music podcast have chosen different kinds of songs. It's going to make a really eclectic, interesting listen, just as a playlist alone.
I've loved listening to the others as well, exactly.
Yeah. And if you want to pair them with whiskies, drink responsibly, don't have 20 or 25 drams, but try and take one whiskey with one track and enjoy it. And Nicola, a pleasure. Cheers.
Vic Galloway.
Cheers.
I know you so well.
Thanks for checking out Malts and Music. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, we are building a playlist of all the tracks discussed. You can find that on Spotify. And for all your whiskey needs, unfiltered, Whisky Talk, and so much more, head along to the website smws.com. I'm Vic Galloway, this is the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and I'll speak to you in a month's time.